I don't make the rules, I just break the rules. Let's stay in tune, cause I'm breaking news. I pay my dues. I done paid my dues.
A very busy night in the tropics. Good evening, everyone. We have not only Irma, we have Tropical Storm Jose, and we also have a new tropical depression in the Gulf of Mexico, number 13. We are going to concentrate on this, though, a major hurricane, Category 5, second most powerful storm ever to develop in the Atlantic. It actually ties with a couple of others, Mitch and Wilma. The strongest was Allen with 190 miles an hour. This one has 185, and the new forecast track is very similar to the old one, bringing a Category 5 hurricane just north of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, then working it along the north coast of Cuba. There's Friday at 2 p.m., and then a potential landfall, or very close to it, Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, and then eventually up toward the lower Keys around Key West. This is Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. Now, if you are comparing this to the track that was at 11 a.m., this is about the same position that we had earlier for Sunday morning. So there's an expectation here that the storm will slow down a little bit and we'll end up with a storm position very close to this, although the track could be on the eastern and the northern side of this, or a little farther south where we would feel less of the impacts here. But the most likely track is down the middle and very close to the Keys on Sunday afternoon. Now the winds, the hurricane force winds stretch out about 60 miles. Tropical storm force winds out over 150 miles. So we would certainly feel some of the effects on that track, and any shift toward the north, we'd feel even more. We have watches and warnings in effect all the way from Puerto Rico back through the Dominican Republic. They're now starting to post some warnings, and even through the Turks and Caicos will be next. That will likely happen tomorrow as the storm moves closer. Here are the forecast track, the model guidance, and the models today the really good models did a flip-flop. We now have this windshield wiper effect where the European model, which is right here, it was on the east coast yesterday of Florida, and this is the GFS model, which was more inland. At 11 o'clock last night, this was actually going across Lake Okeechobee and right up the spine of Florida. So these have flipped, and this is important because these models are going to continue to change the next few days, even though they, almost all of them, track in eventually to Florida on Saturday and Sunday. We will see some changes the next few. This is all a timing issue with that trough coming down, and then we have the Bermuda high weakening, and this is all supposed to happen on Saturday and make this turn. If there's any delay in that trough, we would have a storm that would turn later in the forecast period, perhaps even later Saturday and Sunday, and be more of a threat into the Gulf of Mexico, or something that would actually turn before our area and move between us and the Bahamas. But the most likely track is around Key West on Sunday afternoon. There's the European model right there.
Tuesday, September 5th. I'm meteorologist Quaylen Murphy with your tropics update. Let's get straight to Irma, a Category 5 hurricane, winds of 180 miles per hour. This is a potentially catastrophic Category 5 hurricane moving west at 14 miles per hour. So you can see where the center of this circulation is in comparison to the Leeward Islands. Quickly approaching those islands right now. The pressure down to 931 millibars. The system continues to intensify, and that possibility also in the coming days. Lots of warnings and watches in place, including hurricane warnings for Puerto Rico. Starting to see some of those hurricane watches now in place for Hispaniola, also portions of the southern Bahamas, and this will likely continue as we head into the next couple of days for the Keys and also around the coast of Florida. Tropical storm force winds, that potential again from Puerto Rico. We're going to see an extension of that towards the coast of Florida in the coming days as the system continues to move to the west, and also that hurricane force wind potential as well towards the center of that system, and again that extension towards the west. Here's the official forecast track from the National Hurricane Center showing the system likely holding on to Cat 5 status as it moves north of Hispaniola. That's through Wednesday, and then as we get into Friday and the weekend, that's when we're going to see this system possibly down to Cat 4 status. But again, it's all relative when you have these type of winds and this type of intensity with this system. You can see here by the end of the cone, it spreads out into the Gulf of Mexico, also also over parts of Florida and also over parts of Cuba. That gives us that possibility of error as that system continues on to the west. Here's a look at the spaghetti plots, the ensemble models, again, pretty tightly clustered here through the Bahamas. And then as we get closer to Florida, looking at it like some curvature here up towards the southern coast of Florida. It's really going to be all about timing on this system from several variables and features that we're watching. One is that big area of high pressure, which is helping to steer the system to the west over the Atlantic waters. The next we'll be watching is an upper level trough feature. We're already seeing indications of that around the northern half of the United States. This will continue to push to the south. Associated with this trough is a cold frontal boundary, and this is what's going to bring us some cooler conditions into the middle and end of this week. This is also going to help to steer Irma, eventually pulling it to the north. Again, it's all about the timing. So here's the latest on the European and GFS forecast model. The Euro is in the yellow. The green is the GFS. So kind of hard to tell these systems apart at this point, right? That's because they're in pretty close agreement as we move into Friday, moving towards the Bahamas. And so this is what we like to see in terms of forecasting. You want to see where the models are pretty tightly clustered together. So we're seeing that packing here through Friday. It's as we get into the weekend that we start to see a separation of the models, and just a small deviation can make all of the difference. So notice by Sunday midnight, we see the European model with the center over Cuba. We see the GFS model with that center just south of the Florida Peninsula near the Bahamas. So we expect that pool to continue to the north, or at least to begin to the north into Sunday. The question is, will the center of the system be on the eastern side of Florida, or will it be on the western side of Florida? Right now, the GFS favoring the eastern side of Florida, while the European model favors the western side of Florida. Either way, we do expect that increase in potential impacts for the state of Florida. And then eventually the system will have to move more to the north. And so we could see more impacts for the Carolinas in the coming days. In addition to Irma that we're watching, we're also watching now the 10th named tropical system of the Atlantic hurricane season, and that is Jose. This system is east of Irma. Here are the Cabo Verde Islands. You can see this in the open waters of the Atlantic. Winds of 40 miles per hour, moving west-northwest at 13. So I think Jose will lose some of its steam initially because of Irma initially. However, you can see this system has potential to strengthen as the wind shear relaxes and as those waters warm up on its way to the west. This looks like one that will also curve to the north before reaching land. So let's hope for this outcome here based off the latest information from the National Hurricane Center. A turn to the west and eventually northwest just as it gets closer to Puerto Rico. That's one to watch. In addition, we're also keeping a close eye on what's happening in the Gulf of Mexico. A trough here, very disorganized right now, but gradual organization expected to continue in the next 5 days. A 70% chance we could see this system become our next named tropical system of the season. Right now, Invest 95L is a system that's being carefully monitored by the National Hurricane Center. What we expect in the coming days, actually through the end of the week, is that this system will meander closer to the eastern coast of Mexico, producing some heavy rainfall at times, and then move back over the coast of Mexico and inland by the end of the week. Right now, winds of 30 miles per hour, moving west-northwest at 5. That's a lot happening right now in the tropics. The next name on the list is Katia. So we'll continue, of course, to watch that. And here's the GFS forecast. We're not really showing too much here or indicating that we're going to see anything developing. And again, we'll see that push more so inland over the Mexican coast. I show you this frequency chart to show you that we are closer to the peak of hurricane season, the climatological peak, which is officially September 10th. So we have a long ways to go, of course, through September, and then into October, we'll start to see things beginning to wind down in terms of activity. But let's stay alert, let's stay aware, let's stay prepared. Of course, we never know when one of those systems could impact us here at home. Thanks for joining us here online at WDSU.com.
Aid agencies are struggling to get help to millions of people affected by devastating floods across South Asia. More than 1,200 people are believed to have died. It's thought to be the worst monsoon season in decades, with tens of thousands of people forced from their homes in India, Nepal and Bangladesh. Sanjoy Majumdar has more details.
Weeks after the worst flooding in decades, a third of Bangladesh is still underwater. Many villages in the northern parts of the country still cut off. Aid agencies are desperately trying to reach those affected. It's a similar situation across large parts of South Asia. The eastern Indian state of Bihar has been hit the hardest. Heavy rain and overflowing rivers have left large areas underwater. More than 500 people have been killed here in the past few weeks. Tens of thousands of people have lost their homes and are staying in temporary camps.
There's a lot of damage. There's a lot of people still out of their homes. People are surviving and getting on with things as they can, but there's been a lot of damage.
And India's financial capital, Mumbai, a city of more than 20 million, was brought to a standstill after torrential rain hit the city on Wednesday. It left commuters stranded, transport services ground to a halt, forcing many to simply wade home.
We're in the middle of the annual monsoon season and it's been raining intensely across India but also neighbouring Nepal and Bangladesh for the past several weeks. It's caused the worst flooding in decades and it's led to a massive humanitarian crisis across the entire region.
South Asia is not unused to floods, especially at this time of the year. But the scale of the disaster this time round has meant that the authorities have struggled to cope. Sanjay Majumdar, BBC News, Delhi.
One of the world's populated city, Karachi, Pakistan, is in flood. Handling flood with 15 million population living in that is not only difficult to handle but worse to arrange. Day before the Eid Muslims festivals is starting, Karachi is facing one of the strongest flood in 40 years. You can see people scrambling and whistling in the water. Karachi is not only famous for biggest population in Pakistan, but it's also famous for one of bad drainage system, poor economic conditions and facing worse terrorism. Karachi is also facing internal civil war. Two major nations like MQM, which are Indian Muslims, migrants in Pakistan and Pashtuns. They both are fighting for the rights with each other in Karachi. All these things made Karachi one of worst city with such a huge population. They have such weak management in the city that last 700 lives were lost due to heat stroke and no electricity. Yesterday flood has took more than 35 lives, out of that 11 were electrocuted.
This world is not what you think it is. This world is not what you think it is. Oh, oh. This world is not what you think it is. The hand that moves on a fingerprint.
Fingertips, word is at my fingertips. Reaper in my cuticles. Police want my fingerprints.